Oh, hello again, everybody. Happy Columbus Day. Today is Columbus Day. I told you I was going to do a little show for Christopher Columbus. And here we are back in seat 209 at Del Castle. End of my teaching day. I had school today. Some schools still close on Columbus Day. Of course, it's still a federal holiday. So banks, mail, etc., still observe Columbus Day. But it certainly has changed. Columbus Day has changed over the years, and the way people look at Columbus has certainly changed. So I wanted to spend a few minutes today highlighting some of his achievements. Born in 1451 in Genoa, Italy, Christopher Columbus, of course, a famous mariner, and of course, he did not discover the New World. People always argue, well, the Native Americans were here. Leif Erikson, the Vikings. Some people even claim the Chinese were on the West Coast hundreds of years before Christopher Columbus. We must give him credit for being one of the first of the early explorers to have the guts, the wherewithal to travel across the Atlantic at a time when there were still plenty of stories and legends about sea monsters and leviathans, and still some uncertainty about what was beyond the horizon. Christopher Columbus had a feeling that he could get to India and China. Of course, Marco Polo had opened up those markets to the Europeans, and he thought that the land route took too long, and he could find a sea route to Asia and to India and China. And so he moved forward, again, born in Genoa and employed by the Spanish. He first went to the Portuguese to try to get backing, financial backing, ships, a crew. The Portuguese stalled for many years and eventually said no. He also tried with the French and with the British to try to get funding. That's little known, but that's also fact. Finally settled with the Spanish, and King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella backed him. He had a total of 4 voyages to the New World. In his first voyage, of course, he went across 1492. It took several months, and his crew were on the verge of turning against him. Mutiny was certainly talked about on board. The sailors were scared. They were running out of food. They were running out of water. Columbus was able to keep their support and luckily discovered land when he did. Or it may not have been a happy ending for Christopher Columbus. Much maybe like Hudson. Hudson's crew turned on him and put him adrift on a lifeboat, and he was never seen again. And his crew took the boats and turned around. So Henry Hudson, Columbus could have fared a similar fate. But luckily, they did sight land, and they landed in one of the islands today in what we call the Bahamas. And, of course, with Columbus and his voyage started what we know today as the Columbian Exchange. And I wanted to take a few moments and highlight some of the things that, and this really changed the world, things from Europe made its way to the new continent, and things from the new continent made their way to Europe. And today, many of these things we take for granted. But it was Christopher Columbus whose first voyage started this back and forth of material goods. So let me just go. These are things from the Americas that were brought to Europe. These are things that the Europeans had never seen before. Avocados, beans, kidney, navy, and lima beans. Bell peppers, black-eyed Susans, the flowers. Cacao, which of course would be used for chocolate. Chili peppers, maybe one of the biggest ones on the list, corn. Corn, very significant. Cotton, marigolds, papayas, peanuts, petunias, pineapples, poinsettias, potatoes, pumpkins, quinine, which would later be used for malaria as mixed for the malaria medication. Rubber, squash, sunflowers, sweet potatoes, tobacco, tomatoes, turkey, vanilla, and about tomatoes, again, for the Italian Americans out there. Again, imagine if Christopher Columbus didn't bring the tomatoes over. What kind of culinary arts we'd have in Italy without tomatoes. So those were the things that were brought from the Americas over to Europe. Some things that were brought from Europe to the Americas. Bananas, barley, cabbages, carnations, chicken, there was no chickens here, coffee, cows, crabgrass. Next time you're mad about your front lawn, maybe you can get mad at Christopher Columbus. They brought crabgrass over here. Daffodils, daisies, dandelions. Same thing with your lawn, right? There were no dandelions until the Columbian Exchange. Horses. There were no horses indigenous to the Americas. They were brought over. Lemons, lettuce, lilacs, olives, oranges, peaches, pears, pigs, rice, sheep, sugarcane, tulips, turnips, and wheat. Those were all items that the Europeans brought to the New World in this, what we call Columbian Exchange. There were also diseases, and you hear a lot about that with the negative of Columbus, that he brought these diseases killing millions and millions of people. And there were, remember, the native population, the Native Americans, the Indians, as Columbus called them, because remember, he thought he landed in India. And so these first people he saw on the beaches, he claimed they were Indians. The name stuck. And some of these diseases, their bodies could not deal with. They had not built immunities and strengths like the Europeans had over all of the years. Smallpox, measles, malaria, and chickenpox. And some of these diseases did indeed kill large populations of the Native Americans. There were a few diseases that were brought back to Europe. Interestingly enough, polio and syphilis. Those were the diseases that the Americas gave to the Europeans during the Columbian Exchange. And this Columbian Exchange changed the world economically, physically, politically. These crops were brought over. For instance, bananas. Bananas weren't here. Today, when you think of bananas, I think of Chiquita bananas, I think of South America automatically. That was a major thing. Sugarcane, same thing. These products changed farming. They changed farming methods and would eventually change the whole economic political spectrum of the New World. Let's not forget that Columbus's name is on many cities, many towns are named after him. Columbia University. There was a battleship called Columbia, the USS Columbia, the gem of the ocean, if you remember the old song from the 1890s, part of the Great White Fleet of Theodore Roosevelt. And so anything with the name Columbia is really associated with Christopher Columbus. So we have a lot of reasons to be thankful for a man like Columbus, a man who had never gave up. The Portuguese said no, the British said no, the French said no. He kept trying and kept trying because he believed in something. And he went forward and really did change the world, whether we want to give him credit or not, or whether we want to make him a negative thing. In today's world, when you look at history and you start wearing the lens of today and how we feel today and our wherewithal of today, and you start to study history through that lens, it gets to be real easy where you start to blame one person and say one person was evil, etc. You really can't do that. What was done back then was how it was done back then. Slavery existed back then, all right? And really, you can't even blame Columbus. It was the Spanish who he was working for who would become the governors and the rulers of these new lands. Not really Columbus. By the end of his life, he was pretty much going senile and really wasn't paid attention to much at all once he made these discoveries. So I like to give him some credit when we can, and it's Columbus Day today. Here's a couple of quick facts that not everybody knows. They say that Columbus was trying to prove that the earth was round, and really this flat earth theory, which is kind of back in the news today, a lot of people talk about it still today. Columbus and many other scientists of the period really had known that the earth was round, and it was the ancient Greeks, the mathematician Pythagoras, that kind of surmised that the Earth was round, and so that wasn't really a stretch for Columbus or other mariners out there. So it really wasn't something that he thought about the Earth being flat. Some people may have believed it, but he and others had the concept that we lived on a globe, right? The Nina and the Pinta, and of course the Santa Maria were his three ships. But let me read this to you. The Nina and the Pinta were not the actual names of two of Columbus's three ships. In 15th century Spain, ships were traditionally named after saints. Salty sailors, however, bestowed less than sacred names upon their vessels. Mariners dubbed one of the three ships on Columbus's 1492 voyage the Pinta, Spanish for the painted one or prostitute. The Santa Clara, meanwhile, was nicknamed the Nina in honor of its owner, Juan Nino. Although the Santa Maria is called by its official name, its nickname was La Galega, which was named for the province of Galicia in which it was built. So a little bit of trivia there on the three names of the ships. Again, he made 4 voyages. On his last voyage, he was brought home in chains. He was arrested by his Spanish officers who had really taken over the governorship of the time. And then even in death, Columbus continued to cross the Atlantic. So following his death in 1506, Columbus was buried in Valladolid, Spain, and then moved to Seville. At the request of his daughter-in-law, the bodies of Columbus and his son Diego were shipped across the Atlantic to Hispaniola, and he was buried in Santo Domingo Cathedral. When the French captured the island in 1795, the Spanish dug up the remains, thought to be those of the explorer, and moved them to Cuba before returning them to Seville after the Spanish-American War in 1898. However, a box with human remains and the explorer's name was discovered inside the Santo Domingo Cathedral in 1877. Did the Spaniards exhume the wrong body? DNA testing in 2006 found evidence that at least some of the remains in Seville are those of Columbus. The Dominican Republic has refused to let other remains be tested. So it could be possible that Columbus lays in rest both in Europe and in the New World. Some of his body might still be over here. So it's Columbus Day. I hope everyone had a good Monday. I took a few moments to give my students a little background on Christopher Columbus. I had kids in here, sophomores, 15, 16. They had no idea who he was, at all, because I think we've gotten so into, labeling him a negative historical person. And so I spent a few minutes today going over Columbus, what he did, good and bad. It's history. And you can't repaint history whenever you feel like it. It is what it is. So Christopher Columbus, happy Columbus Day to all the Italians out there that we've always kind of grown up with Christopher Columbus and Columbus Day being a thing for us. And so if that's how you feel about Christopher Columbus, happy Christopher Columbus Day. If you think he was an evil devil that killed millions of people, go on. That's fine. I'm not going to change anybody's mind. But I wanted to highlight a few things. So we got Christopher Columbus and the landing, a nice portrait behind me. And that's it for today. So I hope everyone has a good afternoon. I hope you have a good rest of the week. And I'll be in touch real soon. We'll have some more stuff for you. All right? Take it easy. And until we meet again, I'm going to shut her off. Bye, everybody.